Good morning and welcome to the March 4th, 2019 edition of the Gold, Goats, and Guns Short News. My name is Tom Luongo. We've got a lot to talk about. Today I want to talk about Tulsi Gabbard. I just got finished watching her podcast she did with Joe Rogan back last September. It's making the rounds. It was on Lou Rockwell's blog this morning, and I finally got a chance to watch it. I didn't realize she had been on Joe Rogan, so it was kind of cool to sit down and watch that over my morning coffee today. But before we get into the specifics of that, because I've got a lot of observations about this and I think they're very interesting. Let's go over some of the basics, right? Let's get down to brass tacks. Monday nights, 8 o'clock, Friday nights, 8:30, live streams. We go for about an hour and 15 minutes, 20 minutes worth of prepared commentary, and then open Q&A after that. We generally discuss geopolitics, but I am open to talking about my goat farm, music, movies, you name it. I don't care. Whatever. So the markets, all of that stuff. You can follow my work over at tomluongo.me, as well as I now write weekly also for moneyandmarkets.com, as well as strategicculture.org. So you can find all of my work there, and you can, of course, support my work over at Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns, where I publish the Gold, Goats, and Guns investment newsletter and give out twice weekly video market reports as to what I think is happening in the most strategic and interesting markets, trying to distill down what's been happening geopolitically and distill that down into market moving and actionable advice. All right, so let's get into this thing with Gabbard. So if you haven't watched Gabbard's podcast with Joe Rogan, it was from last September, I actually urge you to do so. Even if you're a libertarian or conservative, liberal, doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. This is a very interesting woman. I've talked about Gabbard in the past. I've written about her in the past since she declared herself as a candidate for the 2020 Democratic nomination for president, which I think is very useful. Now, to remind, Tulsi Gabbard is 37. She's a veteran, Hawaii National Guard. She served in Iraq in, apparently, it was a medical unit that she served in, because I don't think her religious background would allow her to see combat, which is to her credit, to be honest with you. But I want to get into some of the things that I noted here, and actually, probably the better format to do this would be to pull excerpts and discuss them like a lot of people on YouTube do. But I frankly don't have time for that. So just going to give you some straight up things. So first, there'll be a link in the description down below to the Joe Rogan podcast. Again, I heartily urge you to watch it, and certainly watch the entire thing, because there's something that happens around the hour and 10-minute mark that I think is really, really important. I'm going to discuss that in just a minute. But here are my early observations. I liked Gabbard from the beginning when she started discussing a non-interventionist foreign policy. I loved the fact that she went to Syria in 2016 to try and figure out what was going on. Really impressed with her stance on the corruption within the DNC over the superdelegates. She, at the time when she resigned from the DNC, was a superdelegate, because by being a member of being I think the vice chair of one of the committees of the DNC, that she was actually a superdelegate, and she took the very principled stance of saying the superdelegate system is wrong, and I applaud that kind of decision. That took a lot of character. That takes the kind of character and the kind of willingness to be vilified by your tribe that it takes to cut through this current political miasma. Because people do, one of the overriding things about the current political trends is that people are looking for authenticity. I talked about this from the moment I started blogging in publicly back in 2016 during the campaign. I wrote an article called The Authenticity Gap, and it was really about why millennials were rejecting Hillary Clinton. And one of those millennials happens to just be Tulsi Gabbard, and why millennials why they flocked to Bernie Sanders, including her, and why many of them, I think, are going to flock to her in this political cycle if she's allowed any kind of national platform. And of course, the DNC is going to work very diligently, not difficultly, but diligently, to prevent that from happening. They've already tried, but it hasn't worked, which is excellent, by the way. What I've noticed, and the biggest thing with her is this. She's a very conscientious person. I'm now thinking about, kind of 5 pillars, big 5 pillars of personality. Most liberals are very open. They score high in trait openness. She doesn't do that. She's a very open person. You can see that she cares deeply about these things. She cares deeply about that. But she's very conscientious. And when you look at the way she responds to questions, and Rogan asked her a number of softballs in many ways in order to try and tease out of her watch the interview carefully. You'll see it. He's trying to, he's trying to find out. He's probing her to find out where she is kind of, from a personality perspective. It's very interesting the way he does it. And it's very obvious that she's very conscientious. She cares deeply about community and family and this and that, and the effects that policy have on individual people. But she's not interested in policy prescriptions that are absolutes, right? She's very much down to understanding what the problem is and how to implement a solution. Meaning she understands what I bring up all the time, the difference between specification and implementation. That it's one thing to specify that something is a problem and it's vile and it's evil and it needs to be dealt with. It's another thing to then be very considerate about what solutions we implement. And this came up when she talked about education, she talked about healthcare, she talked about all of these issues, universal basic income, all of those answers that she gave Joe Rogan. Now, maybe she was, kind of soft pedaling her answers because she knew that she was, of the kind of environment that she's in, but I don't think so. Because she was very consistent across the board in how she approached every one of those answers, which is to say, we do need to recognize that these are very complicated problems and that there are multiple sides to the stories, which is true, and that just throwing money at the problem is not necessarily going to solve it, which is refreshing to hear from somebody who's a Democrat. And she didn't immediately say, yes, we absolutely need universal basic income. No, she's like, no, I understand that we have to be very careful about how we implement something like this if we're going to implement it, and whether or not we could just do away with the current entitlement system, which was a great point that she made. It was like, look, we could just do away with the current entitlement system and just hand out the money that we spend on the entitlement system now without any of without any of the overhead costs, which is a very libertarian argument, by the way. That's a very systemic argument. That's one to say, look, the problem is, like everything else, an efficiency argument, which is a perfectly reasonable one. And she's very utilitarian, so she's very pragmatic. Not necessarily saying that I believe in utilitarianism or believe in only pragmatic solutions, but we are living in the world we have today as opposed to, of course, the one we want. So there's those problems. But it seems to me that Gabbard is always interested in trying to maximize the effectiveness of whatever policy we're going to put in place. And if that policy means a radical overhaul in order to affect better solutions, including legalization of marijuana, getting rid of private prisons, doing away with civil asset forfeiture and all of that stuff, then that's what we do. If it means that we substitute the current entitlement system, which is a bureaucratic nightmare, and bankrupting the country, and just hand out universal basic income, which is, again, to this libertarian, is anathema to the solution to the problem. But it's one of those steps that, like, the system currently is so bad that universal basic income would be better. It's kind of the same argument as to why the healthcare system, they want to go to single payer healthcare. And she even backed off on that. She wasn't necessarily in favor of all kinds of, in favor of that either. I don't know what her current position is, and I don't really care. I just noted that as these concepts came up, she was willing to have discussions, and she was willing to entertain all sides of the situation and constantly emphasize the idea that it does not matter what the label is after your name, Tulsi Gabbard / Democrat Hawaii versus somebody, Tom Luongo, libertarian from Florida. It doesn't matter what the LRD, GBY, LGBTQ, BBQ sauce does not matter. What matters is, what are we going to do to maximize our effectiveness of this policy? And how can we get to improving the lives of the people we're supposed to represent? And that is rare coming out of a Democrat. Period. It's rare. It's more, she never once talked about her feelings. Oh, I feel we should do this, or I feel we should do that. That's a very open person. She was very pragmatic and down to earth. And this is very important. Because then when you get down to, because that tells me that Gabbard is a systemic thinker. And that's a rare thing from a person who identifies on the left. It's a rare thing. Systemic thinking is, in many ways, according to Jonathan Haidt, tends towards people who self-identify as libertarians. And when you listen to her talk about reaching across party lines, when you're reaching across the political divide in order to craft solutions, that's what she's talking about. She's thinking in terms of root cause, going to the root cause. Let's not talk about free education. Like, she balked at Bernie Sanders' idea of free education. She's like, I don't think that's going to solve the problem. We have to look at the root cause of what's wrong with our educational system in the first place. That's refreshing. When somebody wants to talk about root causes, I'm interested. Because if you're doing root cause analysis, then you have somebody who's willing to entertain those ideas and not just talk platitudes. Then we're talking about someone who you can work with, someone who you can influence what solutions you're going to implement, because we can agree on what the problem is, and we can come at the problem from completely different perspectives and still craft a perfectly reasonable solution. She even mentioned this when it came to, I'm not sure what the issue was, but it was a great example. Now you can turn, well, the Republicans want to come at it from the fiscal side, the Democrats want to come at it from the social welfare side, social welfare, social justice side, and we can come together and say, no, but our goal is we both want the same things. And that's lacking in our political discourse today. As a matter of fact, that's actively being discouraged in our political discourse today by people like George Soros and Tom Steyer and Hillary Clinton and Obama and the rest of them and all of it. And the same thing and the Koch brothers on the right and Sheldon Adelson and all of these people. That's where Tulsi Gabbard becomes very interesting. And the other thing, and so the last thing I want to say, I've been going on now for far longer than I probably should, but the last thing to discuss here is the following. At around the hour and 15-minute mark, I think, or around 20-minute mark, somewhere late in the podcast, Joe Rogan asks her point blank, as a member of Congress, what's the first thing, if you could change something tomorrow, what's the first thing you would work on? And she went right to civil liberties. She went right to all the big ones. Civil asset forfeiture, post-Patriot Act spying by the NSA, marijuana legalization, private prisons, all of it. And how that all ties into foreign policy. That makes Tulsi Gabbard somebody really, really interesting. I just, without prompting, without thinking about it for a second, she didn't like, oh, I'm not sure what. No, she went right to the jugular. She went right to the heart of the friggin' problem. She knows what she wants to change. And I've got to say, that's impressive. And that's, dare I say it, seductive in a political sense. My ears have been pricked up. For the first time in a while. We might actually have somebody who's not completely full of it. We'll see how long it lasts, if she actually wins a primary. But whatever. For now, I like what I'm seeing from Gabbard. I still stand by my my observation, though, that I really wish she had kids, because that would lock down all of this at a kind of visceral level, make her really, really dangerous to the status quo. All right, this has been the Gold Goats and Guns short news for Monday, March 4th, 2019. If you like what you heard today, please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd really appreciate it. Click the little bell for notifications for when I go live. So when I do these short ones, you guys can talk amongst yourselves while I'm just staring at OBS Broadcaster, because I'm not interacting here. And again, Monday nights, 8 p.m., Friday nights, 8:30. Come join the live streams. They're a good time. They're also NSFW. I don't hold back. All right, you guys take care. You have a great afternoon. Be well and keep your stick on the ice.